should remove this spotlight now.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Welcome to this 23rd day evening session of a month-long global festival of oneness to celebrate Adi Shankara Jayanti Utsav arranged by Advaita Academy. Let us start with chanting of a Shanti Path and Ekashloki Advaita. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Jyotistava Bhanumana Anime Ratro Pradipadikam Syadevam Ravideepa Darshanamidam Jyotirakshahime Chakshustasya Niminanadi Samaye Kindhir Dhiyo Darshani Kintatrahamato Bhavan Paramakam Jyotistadasmit Prabhu. Today evening, we are privileged to have Shri Venkatraman to guide us on practicing Advaita Sadhana, benefits and challenges. Shri Venkatraman brings to the table more than 2 decades of experience and expertise spanning the domains of sales and marketing, branding, project management, training, business process management, and creative and structured writing.
Sanjeev, your voice is low. Can you just...
Okay. He has worked and held leadership positions across cross-section of companies spanning healthcare, business, strategic consulting, knowledge process outsourcing, and training. Besides his area of core competence, Ramesh is also deeply invested in understanding, practicing, and disseminating the dharmic and cultural heritage of India. Writing is his passion, and he has authored several articles on the range of topics, including culture, spirituality, and politics. He presently works as a director of Vivekananda Institute for Leadership Development, We Lead, an initiative of Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement, SVYM Mysore. He is also an honorary member on the Joint Board of Studies of Vidyavardhak College of Engineering. Over to you, Venkatraman.
Thank you, Sanjeev ji. I think thank you for that introduction. Shruti Smrti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavatpadam Shankaram Loka Shankaram. I would like to thank the organizers, Advaita Academy, Nitin Sridhar, Sanjeev ji, for giving me this opportunity. As I said, even while accepting the invitation, I do not really know why I was invited, but I accepted in the spirit that opportunities do not come by chance, but rather they come because Narayana opens the door at times and asks that one speaks and shares his thoughts. Then one must not say no. If there is going to be any truth in what I am going to say, then the credit goes to him, and only the mistakes are mine. I add this disclaimer primarily because I've often questioned myself as to, do I actually practice Advaita Vedanta? Do I actually know what it is, and what does it mean when we say that we practice Advaita Vedanta? So that is so essentially I'm going to be discussing a few of the challenges and the conundrums that we are that we're presented with when we talk of a subject like Advaita or Vedanta for that matter. It is said of Shankara that by about the age of 8, he was a master of all knowledge. By 16, he had completed his commentaries on the principal Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Brahma Sutras. Between 16 and 30, he traversed the length and breadth of the country, debating and defeating the greatest minds of the times, in an attempt and succeeding in establishing the pristine philosophy of Advaita. But for the last 2 years, anecdotal evidence suggests that he remained a Mauna Muni, the silent sage, the Dakshinamurti Swarupa, before dissolving into the eternal silence of the supreme consciousness. One wonders, why he should have, dissolved into that silence during the last 2 years. For now, I will park it and then, come to that question again at a later point in time. It is also said that when Shankara made his way to the place of his guru, he went in search of his guru, Govindapada, who had by that time, almost become a recluse. He was deep within, he lived in a cave and hardly ever came out. So when Shankara stood outside the cave and asked that he be allowed inside, it is said that somebody like Govindapada, who was, unshakable in one sense, and, who was often compared to Adisesha in terms of how steady and unshakable he was, actually felt something, and he asked the question, "Who are you?" And it was this time that Shankara composed Shloki, the 10 shlokas, where he introduced himself, and there he's known to have said, introduced himself. The first stanza says, "Na bhumir na toyam na vayur na kamne indriyam vana tesham samuha." Neither the earth nor the water, nor fire nor air nor space or ether or even the sense organs am I, or not even the sum total of all of these things am I. Because he says that all of these things are inconstant and ephemeral, here now and gone then. And then he goes on to say, "Anaikati katvat sushuptyeka siddha tadveko vasishtaha shiva kevalo aham." He's saying, I am that auspicious, absolute, infallible being and one indivisible self. That is who I am. That is how he introduced himself. And the story goes that, Govindapada stuck his feet out of the cave and Shankara held on to it, and he was almost pulled into that cave, and then the journey started. Again, I present this and pose the question: at 8, did Shankara have an intellectual understanding of what Advaita constituted, or was he already in that state of Advaita? That is the first point. Second, if he was already in the state of Advaita, why go in search of a guru as well? So these are questions that often come to people who are not really, full-time practitioners or full-time into this that we talk about. Even as I was looking at the title of the topic, I suddenly realized the duality in it as well. It could simply have been called Advaita Sadhana. The word practice is redundant as it is covered under sadhana itself. So that is. Now, as we examine this philosophy of Advaita, as I see it, The promise of Advaita, as I see it, is that it is a possibility in the here and now, that it is possible here and now. Advaita is not about an ihaloka or a moksha loka and so on. Rather, it is about the realization of the universality of the concept of oneness. It's the universality and oneness of consciousness as a real and living experience. It necessarily needs to be experiential. Advaita, therefore, is not about freedom of the mind, but rather freedom from the mind, as I see it. From the standpoint of Advaita, there is no fundamental difference between the Jivatma and the Paramatma. I might be simplifying this, but I'm driving at a sort of one conundrum that I'm going to present to you. Once the Jivatma crosses over and becomes inseparable from the Paramatma, then where is the Jivatma? Is the question that is asked. Many years ago, I remember a conversation that I was having with in the Ramakrishna Ashram in Alsur. It used to be called the Vivekananda Ashram there, and I heard one of them, one of the monks there talk about how there is a glass of water that is half full. I think the discussion centered around Atma Bodha, and he said there is a glass of water that's half full, and there is a droplet of water that is moving down from the rim down the wall of that glass. The droplet remains so long as it is not, so long as it does not touch that, the water that is there in the glass. Once it touches, the droplet is no more a droplet. Even if you try to find it, you will not be able to find it. To me, that appealed as a great way of putting Advaita Sadhana. But then again, the question is, all this seems to be analytical, seems to be a reality, but how do we reconcile the fact? And I present to you the first of the conundrums, the need to reconcile the reality of our worldly experience versus the monistic point of view that stands on the substratum of oneness of consciousness, that there is no other. The question that, the mind that asks is, how can we deny what we see and experience in the world on a daily basis? When we sip a glass of coffee, when we drink coffee, the taste of coffee is there for 5 minutes, then perhaps it disappears. When we long for that masala dosa in, say, Vidyarthi Bhavan in Bangalore, or the idli in the Brahmin's cafe in Bangalore, it is the taste that we want. It is something that we taste. It stays there for 5 minutes, but the taste for it, the desire for it lingers for much longer. That is the vasana. So the next time, it's almost Pavlovian in the way we respond to it. Even the very smell of brewing coffee or the smell of a masala dosa would trigger a series of feelings within the mind. And therefore, how do we reconcile the fact that this cannot be real? So there is a real need to be able to reconcile the apparent reality of what we see and experience on a daily basis versus what Advaita says. And particularly, when we are told that all of this is Maya, and when this Maya is interpreted as illusion, or that the world is false, it seems to rebel against what the intellect and the senses perceive as a living, throbbing reality. Therefore, the problem that I see here, as I present the first conundrum, is that there is a general reluctance to pose such questions, not in the spirit of disparaging the concept, but rather in the spirit of finding out for oneself. Adi Shankara himself always wanted people to question everything before accepting it. Swami Vivekananda, kept drilling home the point that we need to ask questions, understand, experience before we are able to speak. Therefore, the first conundrum is, how do we reconcile this, what appears to be real, and say that it is not unreal? And how do we reconcile the two? Is the reconciliation at all possible? There is a nama of Vishnu called Pratishtitaha. That is nama number 327 from the Vishnu Sahasranama. It is a reference to that Narayana who is not dependent on anything or anybody. He is the Bhuma, the substratum on which everything else exists and from where everything is projected, as it were. The universe is an emanation from that Bhuma, who is seen here as the infinite. Both Shankara and Parashara Bhattar in their commentaries interpret it similarly and then point to a verse in the Chandogya Upanishad, where Narada and Sanat Kumara are having a conversation. They are having a conversation on the nature of Brahman, referred to here as Bhuma, that which is infinite. Sanat Kumara tells Narada that the infinite being is that in which or whom one sees nothing else, hears nothing else, and finds nothing else. Meaning that the infinite being is so all-pervading and so immersive that when one is in it, he sees nothing else but that. Like the man in the middle of an ocean who sees nothing but the expanse of water and nothing else. Narada, being Narada, does not accept this straight away. To this description of that infinite being, Narada poses a counter, a question that is perhaps in all our minds. And in this conversation, Narada asks that. He says, Bhagavaha kasminscha pratishtitaha. He says, dear sir, on whom or on what or where is that infinite being established? Where is he? On whom does he rest? And to this question from Narada, Sanat Kumara's response is not only intriguing, but truly in the spirit of inquiry. He says, Swemahimni. The first answer he comes. He says, it stands on its own power, established in its own power. That is essentially, Sanat Kumara is saying that the infinite is not dependent on anything or anybody else. And then there is a pause. The Sanat Kumara starts to ponder on this question further. And then he says, Yadivana Mahimniti. He poses it more as a question than as a confirmation. He says, or perhaps not even on that. Now, I would like each one of you to step back and ponder on the sheer magic of this conversation. And that moment when Sanat Kumara says that even he perhaps does not know fully what or how and where this supreme being is established. Now, it's important to know, and most of you know, that Sanat Kumara is no ordinary individual. You know, he is the personification of Brahman, in that sense that he's solidified Brahman in one sense, personified as Brahman. The Kumaras are four, but yet one. You know, Sanaka is the ancient one, Sanatana is the joyful one, Sanandana is the eternal one, and Sanat Kumara is the ever young one. Now put the four together and you begin to see what the conception of that Brahman is. You put the four together, like I said, ancient, eternal, the wellspring of supreme joy, and never aging and ever fresh and young. Now let me come back to the conversation between Sanat Kumara and Narada again. Now, we saw while Sanat Kumara is the personified Brahman, that he is Brahman himself, Narada is himself a Brahma Rishi. No less. He is the seer and the knower of Brahman. I now present before you the first of the great conundrums. If in a conversation between the personified Brahman and the knower of Brahman, if the personified Brahman says that he knows, or perhaps on second thoughts knows not, where does it leave us mere mortals? An inference that one can perhaps draw is that anything personified cannot fathom the depths and the reality of the infinite. And in order for us to be able to know the infinite, then one must sublimate our finite self in that infinite. And once the finite self is sublimated in that, infinite self, the argument one could make is that the finite is lost in the infinite, and therefore, where is the finite? Having said this, this brings me to the second conundrum that I would like to present to you. What was experiential and one-to-one has now become expositional and one-to-many. The knowledge of Brahman was a supreme secret, and it required a guru who himself was a knower, an experiencer of that Brahman, who could transmit it to his Shishya. The guru chose his Shishya carefully, as did the Shishya choose his guru. And today, the easy availability of information and not necessarily knowledge has meant easy access to that which was earlier a closely guarded secret and which could be given only to a select few people who were ready to receive it. Access has meant that now so many people are expounding on it, and most, if not all, are doing it without the actual experience of it, even a momentary experience of it. Sri Ramakrishna stood on the banks of the Ganga, and in the distance he saw two boatmen fighting. When one of the boatmen struck the other, Ramakrishna flinched and felt the blow, and later even the marks, the welts from that blow were clearly visible on his body. At another time, when someone walked on the grass outside, he not only felt the pressure of those feet on his chest, but people around also saw red welts appear on his chest. When Paul Brunton walked into the hall where Ramana Maharshi was seated, armed with a list of questions, he was a journalist, he found that he could not ask a single question. He was like a puppet on a string. However, each of his questions appeared to float in front of his mind's eye, and the answers to them as well. He was like a puppet on a string, like I said, completely under the sway of a consciousness that was far, far superior to his own. Or consider the incident when Lakshmi, the cow, walked into the hall and stood transfixed. It was as if she had gone into a samadhi, the cow herself, in front of Ramana. And when she walked away, after she had come out of that state of samadhi, she didn't want to take her eyes off Ramana. It was like she started to walk backwards, because she did not want to, she wanted her eyes to continue to feast on that presence that was Ramana. At this point, I would like to share a story that I heard only in the morning today. I think the person who shared the story is also perhaps logged into this call, but I'll share it anyway, and the credit goes to him. The story goes like this. It seems that there was a person who walked up to Ramana and said, I don't believe in all your Advaita, Vedanta, your sadhana and all of those things. Instead, I am a devotee of Narayana, much like me, for example. And I believe in Narayana. I believe he's the only God. So, do you believe in Narayana? Ramana said, yes, I do believe in Narayana. Do you think I could worship Narayana and go to Vaikuntham? Ramana says, yes, you could go to Vaikuntham. So if I could go to Vaikuntham, can I speak to that Narayana? Can I have a conversation with that Vishnu? Ramana says, yes, you can have a conversation with Narayana. Then the person asks, when I speak to him, what will Narayana tell me? And Ramana, and this is the clincher, and Ramana says, he will ask you to find out who you are. So, I mean, that's the beauty of, people who have actually realized it and how they're able to reconcile all of these things and bring it. So what we know from all of these examples is that there are many such examples. You could take Sadasiva Brahmendra, for example, that we can cite. But the point that I'm driving at is that we know that it is possible for the individual consciousness to expand itself beyond the prison of its physical cage. However, knowing is not the same as experiencing, not the same as anubhava and swa anubhava, the personal experience, which even Shankara insists upon. Today, so many people have a dry intellectual understanding of what it means of the philosophy, but not of the state or its experience. The dry analytical intellect grasps and often flays at it, but in its inability to describe the vastness of that experience, uses a million words. What cannot, the Vishnu Sahasranama is actually that. Most of the words describe the Paratattva, the supreme consciousness that is Narayana. You could have instead used a million words, for example, but each of those words drive at one thing. What cannot be described, what cannot be experienced, has to necessarily be described in a multitude of words. And which is what, so this is the second conundrum that I present to you. That while we are able to intellectually discuss, describe, and grasp the philosophy of Advaita, that perhaps all of this is one, that perhaps the amoeba, that I am but an exaggeration of the amoeba, and the amoeba is only, is me in a reduced form. I am not able to actually relate to it or connect it at a very fundamental, at a practical level. That is the second conundrum, the difficulty that I present to you. This leads us to the third conundrum that I want to present to you. The question is, do we want a free mind or do we want freedom from the mind? The Kanchi Paramacharya, in a series of lectures on Advaita Sadhana, compiled in Daivatin Kural, or the voice of God, talks of how disentangling the mind from the several knots that it has created for itself, how it is, bundled up. Just as you move from one, just as you think that you've gotten away from one thought, there is a fresh thought that comes up. Then there are these old thoughts that keep coming. Then there are thoughts that come from the future and create your present, for example, the fear of every day. And therefore, and it remains stuck in the dense labyrinthine corridors of the mind. Every attempt to free it from itself ends in failure. The thoughts, emotions, fears, desires, and so on run riot inside. And all of that is also reflected in how we act, in how we behave, in the anger, in the emotions that we display, and all of these things. And the more we struggle with it, the stronger it seems to cling to us. Even when it appears like we have gotten away from the smell of past actions, desires, difficulties, and the taste for them still remains. It's like you peel an onion and the smell of onion stays on in the hand, and stays on in the hands. And all it requires is one trigger, and all of these suppressed thoughts come rushing back. And the work of several months, even several years, is lost in a flash. So I pose this question again. Are we looking to free our mind from our thoughts? Or should we actually look at freedom from the mind itself? Because unless the mind is annihilated, unless the mind is lost, how is it possible for us to perceive of a concept that is talking of the universality of the consciousness? Because the individual consciousness has to be completely decimated for it to be able to perceive the greater consciousness that Advaita promises exists. So when the mind with all its bundled up knots of thoughts, fears, anxiety, desires is discarded, then and only then can we see that we are free. Then we are like that Puranic fish released from the Kamandalu into the ocean of expansive waters, and it sees how big the ocean actually is. But freedom from the mind is easier said than done. Again, as the Paramacharya says, If you're wearing a loose shirt, it is easy to take it off and discard it. If, however, the shirt is a little tight, it's a little difficult to discard. But what if the cloth that you're wearing is your very skin? Can you cut it away and throw it away? That is the difficulty. While it appears to be simple, while it appears to be easy, all it requires is for you to understand that everything is one. All it requires for you to understand that it is like a cinema screen where the screen is the same and the picture, only the moving pictures are different. All it requires for you to know is that there is no, that the consciousness within every being, within every living being is the same, and the same consciousness pervades us, invades us, and dwells within us. Well, it's all very easy to conceptualize, intellectualize, and grasp even in terms of its meaning. It stays only as long as things are okay, things are going very fine with us. As long as that happens, we are happy with that. And the moment a trigger comes, the moment something goes wrong, we find that we are back to square one. So like I said, if it's the skin itself, how do we take it and discard it? So the mind is like that, a machine that is constantly generating thoughts, constantly throwing up ideas and thoughts from the past, from the present, from the future, fears from the past, fears from the future, and all of these things. It is the proverbial monkey. And it's not just the monkey that's up to its usual antics. It is also a monkey high on alcohol, and then on top of that, it has been bitten by a scorpion. How do we even bring it under control? Can we even bring it under control? So this is like I said, the third conundrum that we face in Advaita Sadhana. When Arjuna throws away his Gandiva, and Krishna, who is the personification of the Supreme Brahman, depicted as the master of the chariot of life, who is also the one kshetrajna in that kshetra, in that Kurukshetra, as well as the kshetra as in the multiple bodies. He is the one knower of the field, which is the body, as well as the Kurukshetra. And it is he who has carefully choreographed this great culmination of this great battle of Dharma. It is his work. That is the reason why he was even born, to carefully choreograph this entire spectacle, such that the greatest warriors of Dharma would assemble at one place, which was the Kurukshetra, and there they would wage the battle of Dharma. And in that battle of Dharma, sometimes even the good has to die. Sometimes that which is good, sometimes even that which is bad, all of this has to die. And that is so, he says. So in chapter 1, it is Arjuna Vishada Yoga, where Arjuna has simply lost it. And in chapter 2, which is in one sense the aphoristic presentation of the Gita, like a summary of what the Gita is. In verse 60 of chapter 2, Krishna tells Arjuna, Yatato hyapi kaunteya purushasya vipaschitaha indriyani pramatini haranti prasabam manaha. Yatato api, even as he strives, as that person, that intelligent person who wants to strive to get away from the mind, to be free of the mind that constantly hankers after all of these things. Kaunteya, son of Kunti. Purushasya, the intelligent man, that the references to an intelligent man is inferred from the fact that he's making an effort, when the majority don't even think of making such an effort. And many of them even will say that all of this is wasteful expenditure of time. There's much that we have to do in the material world. Additionally, the last word of the first line anyway clarifies that the Purusha in this case is Vipaschitaha, a discerning, somebody with Viveka, who is discerning and intelligent, who's making an effort and trying to progress on the path. Even in such a man of great discernment, in such a man of such great viveka, Indriyani, the senses, Pramathini, turbulent and violent as they are, with a tendency to create distractions and being very powerful because of the lingering vasanas. Vasanas, literally the smell of all of those things that we like, our likes and dislikes, emotions, and all of those things. Haranti, snatch away or deflect away violently from the focus of his attention. And snatch away what? The manaha, the mind. Prasabam, violently. So if that is the reality, how do we even, so therefore, the difficulty that Advaita Sadhana throws up is the need to not just to free our minds, which I consider an impossibility, but rather freedom from the mind itself. Like I said, a complete annihilation of the mind as we know it. And this is what, Ramana Maharshi meant when he proposed the method of inquiry, Nanya, who am I? It is not about sitting down and simply chanting Nanyar, Nanyar, who am I, who am I, who am I, and simply asking ourselves who we are, but rather it is a deeper call to inquire into the nature of the mind itself. And then proceeding further into the inquiry of the answers that come as a result of the inquiry. It's not enough to say, you got an answer, but who is the person who's given that answer? And then going on right up to the root cause of each of these answers. So it's an examination of the nature of the mind. And without examining the nature of the mind, without making the necessary efforts, without the specific steps that we do, it is not possible for us to even think of, forget being in a state of Advaita, but also to think of that. To be honest, most of us, our relationship with God or with our Ishta Devata is essentially dualistic in nature. We see him as the other because we seek something. We can go to the extent of Sharanagati, complete surrender, or Sharanagati has multiple means. Sharan is to come into the benevolent protection. Sharan, Agati, that you have come into his protection. Sharana Gati, if you look at it like that, that once you come into his benevolent protection, the Gati or the speed of your progress can increase. You can look at it many ways, but that is an essential requirement. And it is the rare individual, it is the rare person who is able to transcend the limitations of the mind and actually go up and lead into that super consciousness that Advaita talks about. This leads us to the fourth conundrum, which is that state of Sachidananda, Sat, Chit, and Ananda. What Swami Vivekananda called the state of existence, knowledge, and absolute bliss. The state of Sachidananda seems to be the promise of Advaita. Sadasiva Brahmendra, who was one of the greatest practitioners of, he was not a practitioner of Advaita, but he was somebody who was a pandit of whose knowledge of Veda, he was called a Tarkaratna, and his knowledge of Vedas and Vedanta was such that there was no one, and he was not somebody who lived in the ancient times. He was in the late 18th, 19th centuries. And there was hardly anyone who could defeat him in an argument. He was the Tarkaratna. He was poised to become the greatest philosopher of his times, the Vedanta Shiromani of his times. And at one point in time, some of the disciples, some of his disciple friends who were constantly defeated by him in every single argument, walked up to the common guru that Sadasiva Brahmendra had, and they had, and said, there is nothing that we can do. I mean, he is at times, the way he speaks is insulting and humiliating. And the guru called Sadasiva Brahmendra to him and said, Why do you keep talking? Can you not control your tongue at all? That it was just that one question, that which triggered Sadasiva Brahmendra, and for the rest of his life, Sadasiva lived for a long time. So this was probably in his late 20s. He lived, we know that, to be about 120 or 125 years. So the next 100 years, he became a Mauna Muni. He became an Avaduta, the sky-clad one who discarded all his clothes. But what he did was that all of that was gone. All of his scholarship, the desire to become a great scholar, all of this was gone. But he did author one of the greatest treatises on Advaita, which is called the Advaita Bodha Deepika. And in that, he shows a gradual growth. He talks about what it means, what the state of Advaita means in part one of it. In part two, he speaks of what it means to make that journey. And part three, he speaks of the great joy that the person immersed in that state of Satchidananda actually feels. So this is the fourth, like I said, the fourth conundrum. How do we get to that state of Satchidananda? That there exists a state of absolute bliss, a dimension of existence that is possible even as the jiva lives on this world, the Jivan Mukta, which is what Sadasiva Brahmendra was, which is what Ramana Maharshi was, which is what Ramakrishna Paramahamsa was. He who is free from the mind in a sense and is able to live in the world so long as his karma phala remains unexhausted, discharging his duties not in a disinterested and disengaged way, which is what most people do. They say that I am doing work in the light of Advaita, when they're actually disinterested, disengaged from what they should be doing. That is not Advaita Veda. That is your disinterest in doing some work. So not in a disinterested, disengaged way, but actively and with the knowledge born out of the realization of a higher dimension of existence. The observer who can stand back from his own work and that of others, and when his time comes, simply melt away into the nothingness that from where each one of us emerges. There are many ways in examining this promise of the state of Satchidananda. While there are many ways of looking at this, I will discuss one way I look at it. It could well be different from how it is traditionally seen or expressed, but I've always looked at things from the point of view of whether it appeals to me and whether it is applicable to me and whether it can help me in understanding something better. Therefore, if Sat is seen as the pure existence, the one truth, the essence, the substratum, imperishable and all-pervading, the very basis of all of this existence, not just us, but all that we see around us, the macrocosmic as well as the microcosmic, then this Sat is of the nature of Ananda, absolute bliss, joy without a second, that state of existence which is pure bliss. However, between Sat and Ananda is the Chit, the consciousness. The individual consciousness stands between the truth and bliss of that consciousness. While Advaita holds that the Chit is also in the nature of that self or Sat itself, and that it is in its purest existence simply a reflection of the eternal consciousness of that Sat, it helps for us, or at least for me, to see that in order to realize that Sat and the Ananda that is contained within it, there is a requirement to transcend the Chitta. If we look at the Chitta as a mass, as the mind mass, as the mind, or the collective mind mass that is ours, or use it as the bridge to cross over to that Sat, so that Ananda becomes a natural corollary that flows out of that. But how do we do it? And this brings us back full circle to the first of the conundrums that we started with. Is the world we see an illusion, a Maya, completely false? How does one reconcile the reality of what we see? And like I pointed, is the taste of coffee or the masala dosa or is it actually false? Again, there is a nama of Vishnu which is called Naikamaya, referring to that Narayana and his multifarious manifestations of Maya that we see in the world. And in one of the commentaries that I wrote on this nama, I actually looked at Maya as, or rather, proposed that Maya needs to be understood not in terms of illusion, but in terms of entanglement. Entanglement with the material world to the exclusion of everything else. And this is the origin of the allegory of the whale that covers the true nature of our being. With the talk of the whale that covers, and therefore, unless the whale is removed. Essentially, this is a call to understand the fickle, ephemeral, and fleeting nature of the lives we lead, and the world we think is our playground, that we can do anything that we want. In realizing this and turning our gaze inward, we realize a much higher truth and a reality that is actually far deeper and all encompassing than the earlier reality that we thought to be real. It does not still mean giving up the world, but what is there to give up of the world? It is rather a realization that one can still be in the world, be a part of it, but still be a part. Do what we must, and perhaps look to see if we can get to that state. Because in our present states, while the intellect is able to dissect, the intellect is a sharp instrument. It is able to dissect, pry open, and look into all of these concepts and be able to be able to speak about it. But all of this my submission is, all of this would come to naught if the attempt to experience it, if the attempt to reconcile it with the reality of everyday life is not made, is not even attempted, then Advaita Sadhana will remain a permanent and perpetual challenge. And therefore, we must look to see what we can do. I know that there are more questions than answers, but it's better to have questions than to believe that we have answers when they are not answers, because no answer in this quest promises certainty. I would like to pause here because I don't know what is the time. And if there are any questions, I would be glad to, if I
Yeah, we
can
have
answer
just
them.
yeah, you have just 10, 12 questions. To
Yeah.
10, 12 minutes. Sanjeev ji
Okay.
will ask
Yeah.
the question.
Sure.
Thank you for the nice talk. There are a few questions. The first one is freedom from mind moksha, or is that only a belief?
It's a good question. When we say freedom from the mind, essentially what we're saying, I think the point that the Kanchi Paramacharya makes, as well as the point that I'm making, is that too often we make the mistake of telling the mind, you should not think these thoughts. We try to control the mind. I know that this is a principle that is followed in meditation. We talk about, but it is my submission out of experience that the mind is a great master and a poor servant. Often we think we are the masters of our minds, but we are actually slaves of the mind. Because the mind so easily can control anything, control us and draw us away from what we want to do. Therefore, when people say that I must free my mind from these thoughts, you can just experiment on this. Sit down and say, from today, I will not think this thought. The very next moment, you will be thinking of only that. You say that I will give up sweets. Supposing, let's say you like jalebi. You say, I'll give it up every single moment. You'll have jalebis and samosas floating in front of your eyes. It's not possible to free the mind of its connections. So when we say freedom from the mind, Essentially, it is a state where you are able to say that your mind, essentially it is a state where you are the master and the mind is your slave. You go beyond requesting the mind, telling the mind that you must not think these thoughts, requesting or telling the mind that you must not do this, do that, do this, do that, and all of that, because the mind will simply not listen. I think Ramakrishna Paramahamsa gives a very great example. I think a similar question was asked of him. And I sit down and I can't take my mind off the thoughts that keep coming. He says the mind is like what you need to do is, sometimes even the pet dog needs a good beating. Give it a good beating and ask it to sit in the corner, it will do so. I think that is what is meant by freedom from the mind. At a fundamental level. At the next level, I think, as the Paramacharya says in his commentary, in his very, very detailed commentary, running into 700, 800 pages only on Advaita itself, he says is that unless this skin that covers us is taken off and discarded, and it is possible, but possible only for a few. If it does not happen in this birth, so be it. If it happens after 1,000 births, so be it. But the only way you will even have an opportunity to perceive the reality that Advaita promises is when you do not, when it's not when you have a free mind, but rather you are freed of the mind.
Okay. Second question is that when you give up the intense desire for liberation and or personal experience, it is said that one reaches the goal. Please give your comments on this.
When you give up the
desires for liberation.
Yeah, I think that is a given. I think anybody who starts with this thought that I'm looking for liberation, I think essentially is setting himself or herself up for failure. Liberation is not like the light at the end of the tunnel that we talk about in in strategic management or stuff like that. It's not the light at the end of the tunnel. Liberation is a consequence of several years. I think I don't know if it's Vivek Chudamani or where. I think he says that there are so many people who do not even have the desire for liberation. There are some people who do not even have the desire to go and read a book on spirituality or a book on, say, on Vedas or Vedanta or any of those. They don't even have the desire. They are not even there. There are only a few who have the desire, which means that over several births you have made some progress. There are a fewer still who have gone to the next step where they're saying, okay, I think there is a life beyond all of this. There is a reality that is probably much greater, and therefore they take the first steps. Then there are a few who over several births perhaps have built the kind of, take the example of Ramana Maharishi. Why should he at the age of 18 suddenly have that experience of death? And then everything turns from there. It's not that people think that after that he became a monk. No, he spent 12 years still. He spent 12 years in Virupaksha cave, meditating and contemplating, and then only he found what he did. And his state is an unimaginable state that somebody like him lived, just 70 years ago. Is an unimaginable thing that we don't even realize, or say for Sri Aurobindo for that matter. These are things. This is a culmination of several births. Vivekananda talks about the quantum leap that is possible, but I think the quantum leap is also possible when several such leaps have happened across several multiple births. So I don't think. How do you give up the desire for liberation? Can I simply say that I from today I give up the desire for liberation? No, the mind will keep telling you that liberation is the great thing to do. Liberation is that. Liberation is that. So I think what we must do is, and the other thing is, now I've already come to the conclusion. Another thing is that in the rest of my life that I have in front of me, I don't think I can read more than the Vishnu Sahasranama and the Bhagavad Gita. That is the conclusion I've come to. I think one of the things we must start to do is to start practicing and stop reading too much books. I think what happens, it's not a bad thing to read, but in our search to collect all of this information, we become storehouses of information, but we are no longer practitioners of that. This dharma is not learnt by reading or learning. It's done. It's practice that comes. So, yeah.
Okay. Next question is: serious Western scientists, after considerable experimentation, claim that ultimate state, U and S capital, can be tested using hallucinogenic drugs. More important, that the flash of insight makes the further sadhana far simpler. Patanjali also mentions Aushadhi as one of the pathways to the ultimate state, Yoga Sutra 4.1. Your views on this?
I have some radical views. One of the my first point to this is that I'm very uncomfortable with science. Why should our dharmic concepts, or for that matter, the spirituality, any of those things, be validated by science in the first place? Will science allow its validation on the basis of certain spiritual concepts or rules and regulations? Today, we think that anything that is not confirmed by science is not true, and therefore we want scientific validation of everything that we do. As long as we long for, I am a science student myself, but it's my considered belief that as long as we long for scientific validation of truths that exist beyond the boundaries of science, we will struggle with finding answers. I think the whole approach of trying to use science to validate things that are outside the current parameters of science is to use a project management this is out of scope. We must look at the dharma, look at what we do in the light of what is presented here. We are willing to spend 25 years of our life studying and then 40 years of our life working. We spend 25 years learning. All I'm saying is, are you willing to spend 7 years or 5 years of your life focusing on practicing what is here? And then if you say, no, it's not a truth, it's not validated by science, then perhaps we can examine those things. But if you have not put in the effort, but you put in the effort in the other field and then tell us that, this needs to be valid. So my answer to that question, is a little tangential, but I'm uncomfortable with saying that, science has to validate our spiritual or our dharmic concepts and beliefs. I don't think that is the right approach. There are certain elements that we can look at, which will probably, also reflect in the scientific things that we see, but not all of it needs to be essentially like that.
Is Advaita for Grahastha? Is Advaita for Grahastha?
Yeah, I know. Advaita is for everybody, right? I mean, nowhere has anyone said that Advaita is only for the sannyasi. I think Kanchi Paramacharya also, writes about this, saying that there is this belief that what would you say of Sri Lahiri Mahasya? He was a Grahastha, but to me, he was one of the greatest Advaitins who lived. And so I think the answer to that question is, when the time comes, it doesn't matter if you're a Grahastha, if you're doing all of this. And of the four ashramas, it is Grahastha that is the greatest of the ashramas. It's definitely possible. Anything is possible within the Grahastha ashrama dharma, as long as King Janaka was a Grahastha. Janaka Maharaja was an absolute jnani himself. So it's definitely possible. And I think that there is enough validation of that even in this one. And nowhere is it said that, a Grahastha can't be.
Everyday experience is only Maya. And who creates this illusion? Me. Even this session here, it is not real, but created by me.
That's a good one. Yeah, it's a good one. Okay, every day. See, that's the first of the conundrums that I presented, right? How do we say? I think Aurobindo actually has a very nice way of putting it. He says his integral yoga actually came out of addressing this conundrum that, so every commentary would say that all of this is false, that this world that we see is false. I mean, the our how can I say that, the mother that I see in front of me, the wife that I see, the daughter or the son that I see in front of me is all false. Everything that I see is an apparent reality and not really false, and all of that. So it is a mistake to look at Maya. I think the English language is not does not have within its vocabulary the words to actually capture what Maya actually is. Maya is only a projection of the same Brahman. It is the Prakriti to the Purusha, and therefore to say that Maya is an illusion is, to me, the idea of an integral yoga is that you are able to reconcile the reality of your life, like I said towards the end of what I was saying, and also be able to not only be a part of this, but also realize that there is a truth that behind all this all. And then, so you're part of this life, but still apart from it, that there is, in a sense, the two of you, where one is actually an observer of everything that you do. It's a state that is possible. There are moments when we actually become observers of our own thing, of our own duty. If that state becomes a constant one, then to some extent we have transcended the Maya, because Maya is essentially, as I see it, the entanglement with the material world to the exclusion of everything else. That you think only this is real, that everything else is false. It's not that this world is false, it's that you think this world and nothing else is true. As long as you realize that all of these things that are an entanglement, that it is possible for you to get away from the clutches of that entanglement, or live in the midst of all of this and still be not driven by the constant pressure of those entanglements, then that is the secret of living. It is not easy, which means that this is the sthita pragnasya bhasha that he talks about, that you are in a state where you're absolutely possible for you to be able to say with equal candor that what is happening is happening, it's true, but at the same time I'm able to see it as a play of life and there is nothing else to it. So that is the whole idea, that you are able to that you are able to free yourself of the entanglements, but still live and part of it. That's the challenge, right?
What is your sadhana to experience?
Actually, I don't want. I have not.
It's rather a personal question, but
Yeah, it's a personal question. Like I think I hinted at it towards the end. There was a phase when I went through, when I actually started reading so many books. I used to read about this, read about that, read about Shankara's Atmabodha, his Aparokshanubhuti, his Upadesha Sahasri or Viveka Chudamani, this, that, and all of those things. So it's a constant collection of information that, the idea is that we want to become these great information generators but today, like I said, and I'm saying this genuinely, I don't think I can proceed beyond two things. One is, I've been writing this commentary for close to almost a year now, 1 year now. I am of Vishnu Sahasranama. One name I write per day, which I think is the sadhana, because it takes me about 4 hours to think, contemplate, and write on that name. I see the Vishnu. I did not see it like this, but I see it now. The Vishnu Sahasranama is a window into the world of Sanatana Dharma. I didn't see it like that. When I look at a word and start contemplating on its meaning, when I start contemplating on what it does, then you can see that it is closely connected to several concepts. I spoke about one name, I think, Pratishtitaha. And then you make the connect to that Upanishadic truth. Then you make the connect to the Bhagavad Gita. So it is the window that opens up several other windows, opens up several other nodes. It's rather that you spread yourself thick, focus on one thing rather than spread yourself thin. I think that is the first lesson I've learned after so many years of doing this. Now I can say with confidence that I need to go nowhere but focus only on these two things. And it's going to take about 20 years to 25 years. If I'm assuming that, I have another 30 years to go, 35 years to go, which means that, and I'm saying at the pace at which I'm going right now on the Vishnu Sahasranama or for example, I don't think I'll have time for anything else for the next 20, 30 years. I think that is how sadhana is done. I'm not saying that what I'm doing is the right thing. But if there is one thing that I've learned from making several mistakes is that you do not spread yourself thin. When you choose a Ishtadevata, choose one. If you choose a knowledge system, choose one. If you choose to read a book, read it to the extent that every word goes deep into your consciousness, makes a difference, teaches you something, makes you search, think, reflect upon it, and contemplate on it, meditate on it. If you don't do it that way, I don't think the doors open. The doors never open if you try to collect information. You only collect information. You are good. You become famous. You can talk about various things, but there is no change that happens at the personal level.
How do I accept that Maya is real and real world where we live is an illusion?
Don't accept it. That's what I said, right? You have to reconcile the world you live in is actually real. Like I said, does not say that this world is an illusion. The moment you say this world is an illusion, you tangle yourself up in things that make no sense to you. You can't, at some point in time, perhaps the experience of that other dimension may make you feel, and this is also an analytical reasoning, this comes from reasoning, make you feel that all that you experience in this material world looks false and therefore illusionary. In the present state that you are in, it is not illusionary, it is not fake, it is very, very real. So see it for what it is. The moment you say all of this is fake, when actually in the back of your mind you do not experience it as fake, then you're fooling yourself, you're cheating yourself. Maybe when it comes naturally to you, when you move to a dimension, what Aurobindo calls the super consciousness, or what the state of Advaita, for example, that state of Ananda that you see, then perhaps seen from that standpoint, seen from that viewpoint, all of this looks illusory, because obviously it's illusory, right? I mean, it looks like I was born only yesterday, but I'm already married, I have a daughter, I have I don't think I have as much time left as I have already spent. And haratini meshat kalat sarvam, that is the truth, right? So in that sense you perhaps start realizing it, but till you actually realize it deep within your bones, in the marrow of your bones, in the blood, I mean, don't make the mistake of saying this is false. Then what you will do is that you will start showing disinterest towards work. You will start not being able to do anything of these things. Never make that mistake. Strive, but at the same time, don't ever fool yourself into thinking. I'm sorry if that is the word, but that's I'm using it for the effect. So don't try to ever tell yourself that all of this is false, because in your present state, none of it is false. Everything is real. When you realize that, perhaps at some point in time you will realize that it is unreal, or you may not realize. That's okay, but never make the mistake of saying all of this is unreal.
Thank you very much, Ramesh ji. It was really very passionate and enlightening lecture by you.
Oh, thank you. Namaste.
Thank you, viewers. Also, see you tomorrow.
Thank you.